It was raining the morning they buried her. Not a storm, just a quiet, cold drizzle. The kind that soaks into your bones slowly, like regret. The gravediggers worked in silence. One of them looked at me briefly, as if wondering who I was. No one else stood there. No family, no friends, just me, under a thin black umbrella, watching the only person I ever truly loved disappear beneath the earth. I didn't bring flowers. She hated funerals that felt like theater. If no one cried when I was alive, she once said, they don't get to cry when I'm gone. She had a cruel way of protecting herself. Sharp tongue, soft heart. I was probably the only one who ever saw past both. The priest said her name wrong. Twice. I didn't correct him. It felt like the final insult in a lifetime of erasure. A mispronounced name, lowered into wet soil, with no one to notice but the woman who loved her in secret for 42 years. My hands trembled, not from cold, from everything. When they lowered the casket, I couldn't move. My knees felt locked, my breath shallow. All I could think was, she's really gone, and no one even knows who she was to me. I wanted to scream it. I wanted to tear the air with my voice. I loved her, not as a friend, not as a companion, not as a shadow to her life, as her home, her mirror, her breath, her only constant. But I said nothing, just like I didn't say anything when she asked me to dance with her in the living room back in 1983. Just like I didn't say anything when her mother spat at me. Just like I didn't say anything when the hospital nurse said only family, and pushed me into the waiting room like a ghost. I had grown so used to swallowing my truth that I forgot what it felt like to speak. So I stood there, rain dripping off the brim of my umbrella, shoes sinking into the mud, and I whispered, I'm here, my love. They finished the burial quickly. She had no estate, no obituary, no notice in the paper. Just a cheap pine casket and a temporary headstone with her name barely etched in, as if the world had already decided to forget her before she even left it. But I remember everything. I remember the freckle beneath her left eye, the way she hummed when she cooked, the way she always sat cross-legged in chairs like a little girl. I remember the time we kissed under the boardwalk, terrified someone might see us. And I remember how we didn't care. Not in that moment. She told me once, we were born in the wrong time. No, I think the time was wrong, not us. We had to become experts in pretending. To everyone else, we were two old women who never married, living together to save money. How sweet, they used to say. Lifelong friends. I used to nod, smile, play the role. But we were not sweet. We were fire, quiet fire, hidden in stone. They think love fades as you grow older. They have no idea. Our love didn't shrink. It deepened. It matured into something solid. We knew each other so completely that sometimes she'd look at me and I'd start crying without a word being said. And now I'll never see that look again. As I turned to leave the cemetery, I paused and looked back one last time. I knew it would be the only visit for a while. There was no headstone yet, no flowers, just a rectangle of disturbed earth and the weight of a life that never got to be fully lived. But before I left, I pulled something from my coat pocket. A photo, just one, a small square, sun-faded, taken in 1977. We're both laughing. She's wearing that terrible denim vest she loved, and I'm trying to pull it off her. We look stupid, happy, alive. I placed it at the edge of the grave, tucked under a small stone to keep it from blowing away. Now someone knows, I whispered, and I turned and walked back into a world where we never existed. Not together, but I remember, and I'm not ready to be silent anymore. The first time I saw her, she was carrying 3 cups of coffee in one hand and a folder in the other, arguing with a printer that refused to cooperate. It was 1974. I was newly hired at the regional tax office, still fumbling with my ID badge and unsure of where the break room was. I remember thinking, This woman is a hurricane. Her name was Alice, and she didn't walk. She stormed into rooms, into people's lives. She had that kind of presence that demanded attention without asking for it. Her dark curls bounced as she moved, and her laughter, when it came, was wild and unfiltered, like she didn't care who was listening. She turned to me, still balancing the coffee, and grinned. "You must be the new girl," she said. "Here, the top one's black, no sugar. You look like a no-nonsense type." I hadn't even opened my mouth. I took the cup. Thank you. I actually prefer it with cream." "Well, nobody's perfect," she winked. That was it. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Quietly, invisibly. At the time, I couldn't name it. It wasn't love, not yet. It was more like recognition, as if my soul had been walking in circles and suddenly bumped into someone who knew the map. We became friends naturally. Office banter, long lunches, late nights reviewing reports. She had a sharp tongue but soft eyes, always deflecting compliments, always acting braver than she was. I watched the way she made everyone feel like they belonged, except herself. She never talked about her family. Neither did I. Back then, I was living with my mother, still under the illusion that I might marry some nice boy and follow the script. My older brother had already given her 3 grandchildren. I was the quiet one, the responsible daughter, always polite, always helpful, always aching inside. Alice didn't fit that script. She smoked too much, cursed when frustrated, and had a habit of humming 1950s love songs when she worked, like she was trying to drown out the rest of the world. And I loved being near her. I started looking forward to Monday mornings. I started waking up earlier just to get to work in time to catch her in the hallway. Then one Friday, everything cracked open. She was sitting on the back steps of the office building, alone, smoking. I'd stayed late finishing a file. When I found her, she looked different, smaller, like someone who'd just come back from a long, hard place. I asked if she was okay. She looked up and said, "Do you ever feel like the person you're supposed to be is waiting for you somewhere, but you're too afraid to go looking?" I didn't know what to say. My heart started pounding so loud, I was sure she could hear it. "I think I've felt that way my entire life," I said. She put out the cigarette and smiled, not with her mouth, but with her eyes. A tired, knowing smile. "I was engaged once," she said, "to a man. He had a boat and a summer house, and a mother who hated me. I called it off the day I realized I wasn't afraid of losing him. I was afraid of marrying him." That's when she touched my hand. It was nothing, really, just a brief graze of her fingers over mine, but it jolted through me like electricity. I didn't pull away. I didn't say anything. Neither did she. But everything had changed. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, hearing her voice in my head. "The person you're supposed to be is waiting for you." I didn't sleep. Over the next few weeks, we drew closer in that unspoken way people do when something sacred is blooming. We didn't name it. We didn't dare. But every look lasted a second too long. Every laugh felt like a promise. She would brush her hand against my back when no one was looking. I began to feel the air between us differently. Thicker, charged. One afternoon, after everyone else had left, we stayed in the file room finishing up paperwork. She turned to me and said quietly, "If this were a different world, I'd kiss you right now." I stared at her. My lips parted, but I couldn't make a sound. Instead, I nodded. She didn't kiss me that day, not yet. But she smiled, and I've never forgotten the softness in her face, the restraint, the burning patience. She knew we had to wait. I didn't know it then, but that moment would carry us through decades of hiding. That silent, burning yes between us, the acknowledgement that something had begun, something delicate and dangerous and precious, something I would never get to say out loud. Until now. We never said the word love out loud, not in those early years, not even to each other. It hovered between us, real, undeniable, but unnamed, like a sacred thing too fragile to touch. We lived in a world that only understood love in straight lines. What we had didn't fit into any sentence that could be spoken without consequence. But still, we loved. We found our own language, quiet rituals. She'd leave a note in my desk drawer. Lunch on the roof. I brought apples. I'd leave hers a flower, just a single wild one, wrapped in paper. In a crowded room, she would brush her finger along the inside of my wrist. That was her way of saying, "I see you." At night sometimes, she'd walk me to the bus stop. We'd sit on the bench, closer than we needed to be. Her thigh against mine, our pinkies touching. And when my bus came, she'd always wait until it pulled away before turning to go. I remember one evening, the street lamp flickering above us. She looked at me and whispered, "This is the part where we kiss, right? If we were brave." I wanted to say yes. I wanted to take her face in my hands and pull her toward me. But I just smiled. That's all I could do back then. We weren't brave. Not yet. The city we lived in was quiet, conservative. It wasn't violent, just heavy with eyes. People didn't shout in the streets. They whispered. They judged in silences, in side glances, in phone calls made after church. We learned to be careful. She called me her roommate when people asked. Later, a dear friend. We even shared a lease, but always in one name. When we went on vacations, we booked separate rooms and then quietly slipped into one after dark. We made up boyfriends. We created shadows for the light to hide in. There were moments when I wanted to scream from rooftops, to stop lying, to say, "Look, this is her. This is the person I choose over anyone." But each time I got close to telling someone, a cousin, a coworker, even my sister, I'd feel the old fear crawl up my throat like smoke. Because if I told the truth, I risked losing everything. And yet, we found joy. Oh God, we did. Small, golden, private joy. Sunday mornings with coffee and newspapers spread across the bed. Her humming while she cooked, flour on her nose. Dancing barefoot to old records, the needle skipping just enough to make us laugh. She kissed me for the first time in the garden. It was spring, late afternoon. We were pulling weeds, planting tomatoes. I had dirt on my cheek, and she reached up to wipe it. Her fingers lingered. Her eyes searched mine. Then she kissed me. Soft, deliberate, not rushed, not asking. I didn't pull away. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought I might collapse. But I kissed her back, with everything I had stored away for years. And when we parted, she smiled and whispered, "Now we've done it. No going back." And she was right. That kiss became the anchor of our world, a tiny rebellion, sealed in sunlight and soil. Of course, there were hard days too, days when one of us would slip, a hand held too long in public, a look that lingered, and we'd spend the rest of the night afraid. There were scares, a neighbor who asked too many questions, a distant relative who knocked unexpectedly. There were nights she cried, curled up in bed, whispering that she was tired of being invisible. And I'd hold her, whispering back that I saw her, always. And I did, even when I couldn't speak it. Even when I called her Al in public instead of Alice, like it somehow made her less feminine, less suspicious. Even when I stood 3 feet away from her at family gatherings, pretending we were nothing more than old friends from work. We loved in silence, because silence was the only space that didn't collapse on us. But that silence also began to shape us. We forgot how to say things, how to demand space, how to ask for more. Our world grew smaller, made up of glances, nods, and the quiet, aching knowledge that we were building a life together. One that could be erased with a single word spoken in the wrong room. Still, we stayed. Because even silence, when shared with someone who understands your soul, is better than loneliness spoken aloud. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd had just a little more courage. if we'd risk the rejection, the fallout, the stares. But then I remember the way she looked at me when we lay in bed, the curtains drawn tight, her fingers brushing mine in the dark. We didn't need words. Not then. We had each other. And even now, I can still feel her hand in mine, saying all the things we never dared to speak. My mother always had a way of knowing things without being told. She could smell shame like smoke. She never needed evidence, only silence, only the shifting of my eyes, the tremble in my hands when I came home too happy. She started asking questions the year Alice and I moved in together. Not right away. She was too clever for that. At first it was just comments, thrown out like loose nails. Don't you think it's strange for two women your age to still be living like college roommates? She doesn't have a boyfriend either, does she? I hope you're not wasting your best years being silly. I'd smile, politely. It's just cheaper, Mama. We both work full-time. It's practical. She'd nod, but her lips would tighten. Her eyes would linger too long. Something in her had begun to harden. One night, she came over unexpectedly, arms full of Tupperware, as if casseroles could bribe me back to normal. Alice was in the kitchen, barefoot, dancing with the mop handle like a fool, humming something from the Supremes. She didn't hear the door open. My mother stepped into the living room and froze. I saw the exact moment she knew. The smile drained from her face. Her posture stiffened. The air turned cold. She said nothing. Not that night. She left quickly, forgetting her scarf on the sofa. The next morning she called. No greeting. Are you sleeping with that woman? Her voice was low, steady, dangerous. My mouth went dry. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the blinking red light of the coffee pot. I wanted to lie. I wanted to laugh it off. But something inside me cracked. Yes, I whispered. The silence on the other end felt like falling through a hole in the earth. You disgust me, she said. I sat down. I don't even remember how. One moment I was standing, the next I was folded over the kitchen table like a child hiding from punishment. She's a good person, I said softly. She's perverse. You both are. This isn't love. It's filth. I bit my lip so hard it bled. Alice was still asleep. The whole house was quiet, birds chirping outside like nothing had happened. She makes me happy, I said. She makes you damned. Then she hung up. I didn't speak to my mother again for 3 months. Not a call, not a letter, not even on my birthday. And when she finally did invite me over, it was to tell me I needed to clean up my life or never set foot in her house again. I chose silence, but silence has a cost. Alice noticed, of course. She tried to comfort me. She made soup, brought me flowers, told jokes, but I could see the guilt behind her eyes. Like she believed it was her fault my mother had left. It wasn't. It wasn't her fault that the world was broken, that my family had learned to measure love by rules written in fear, that my own mother could look at the person I love most in the world and see only shame. But guilt seeps into everything, even when you know better. We stopped inviting people over after that. We grew quieter. At first it was just caution, double-checking who might see us holding hands. But over time it became a habit, then a pattern, then a prison. I missed my mother. Not the words, not the judgment. I missed the humanness of her, the way she tied her apron, the way she told stories, the way she'd once held me through fevers and nightmares and growing pains. Now she wouldn't even hug me. She sent letters sometimes, curt, formal, signed only with her name. Not Mama, just Evelyn, like she had filed some legal disowning I never saw. I wrote back once, just 1 page. I'm still your daughter, I wrote. That hasn't changed. I just found someone who makes me feel whole. Isn't that what you wanted from me? She never responded. Years passed. We saw each other only at funerals, mutual relatives, second cousins. She never looked at Alice, never acknowledged her. and I, in return, never brought Alice to her house again. Alice said she understood, but I knew it hurt. I could see it every Christmas I spent away, every empty chair at our little table. "I'm not mad at her," Alice said once. "I just don't want to be erased." And yet that's what happened. My mother pretended she didn't exist, and to keep the peace, I let her. Looking back now, I wonder if that was the worst betrayal. Not my mother's hatred, but my silence. But at the time, all I could think was, I don't want to lose them both. So I chose the quiet. Again. And Alice, ever patient, ever kind, stayed beside me, even as I faded into the shadows of my own family. That's the thing about shame. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just whispers, "Don't say too much. Don't risk the last piece you have left." And so, we didn't. We simply loved in the dark. You get good at lying when the alternative is losing everything. After my mother's rejection, Alice and I created a version of our lives the world could accept. We rehearsed it like a play. 2 single women, old friends, saving on rent. Career-focused. Independent. The kind of women people gossip about in grocery stores, but don't question directly. We had roles to play, and we played them well. At work functions, I'd introduce her as my housemate. At family events, she stayed home. When people asked why I never married, I laughed and said, "Just never met the right guy." They'd nod, half sad, half relieved. No one ever asked if I was happy. Alice once joked that we deserved Oscars. She said it with a smile, but her eyes always dropped afterward, because pretending, no matter how good you are, erodes something real inside you. We staged our holidays. 2 Christmas trees, one in the window for show, one in the bedroom just for us. Valentine's Day became girls' movie night. Birthdays were coded. Her gifts to me were always labeled from A. We signed cards like colleagues. Best wishes. Cheers. In private, we wrote our real words in hidden notebooks. We had a system. One blue notebook, kept behind the cookbooks in the pantry. That's where we wrote things we couldn't say aloud. I'd scribble something in the morning. "I love the way you hum when you water the plants." And later she'd reply underneath, "And I love the way you pretend not to notice." That little notebook became our diary, our invisible vow. But still, there were moments when the mask slipped, and those were the hardest. One Thanksgiving, I invited my younger sister over, just her and her husband. Alice cooked the entire meal. Slow-roasted turkey, garlic potatoes, cornbread from scratch. She wore her nicest blouse, tied her curls back with a red scarf I'd given her years before. At dinner, my sister said, "You two are better than most couples I know." And I felt Alice pause beside me. I laughed too quickly, changed the subject. But later that night, in bed, Alice whispered, "That was the closest I've ever been to being seen." I didn't know what to say. I held her hand until she fell asleep. We kept pretending, even to ourselves. She invented boyfriends. Sometimes Tom from IT, sometimes a guy from the gym I'd never seen. I'd nod along when people asked if she was dating. Once, a friend from college asked if Alice was like that. I said no so quickly I felt sick for days. Because yes, she was like that. And so was I. And we were ourselves when we were together. But the world didn't want us as we were. So we gave them a story they could swallow. It wore us down. The years passed quietly. The pretense calcified. We hosted dinner parties and called ourselves eccentric. We joked about being old maids. We stopped expecting anything to change. And somewhere in the quiet performance of our lives, I forgot how to ask for more. But Alice never forgot. "I want to be yours out loud," she said once over coffee. "I want someone to toast us on our anniversary. I want to go to a wedding and hold your hand without fear. I want to be loved in daylight." Her voice cracked. Just once. She rarely let it show. I kissed her fingers and said, maybe someday. She didn't answer. She just smiled, that half smile she wore when hope was losing its fight. There was a cost to hiding. I can see it now, not just in the missed milestones or unspoken anniversaries, but in what we lost inside ourselves. Because when you deny love long enough, even to protect it, something beautiful goes dim. Still, we stayed. We built a life in shadows. A soft, warm, careful life. A house full of laughter behind closed doors. Mornings spent making toast. Nights spent reading aloud in bed. We knew each other's rhythms, moods, fears. But every joy came wrapped in silence. Every "I love you" whispered. Every photo taken and then hidden in a drawer. Every moment beautiful and secret. We faked our lives for them. And in doing so, we gave up being known. Really known. Yet we clung to each other. Because even a hidden love, when it's real, can become your whole world. His name was David. He was kind, quiet, a decent man. We met at church back when I still went to please my mother. He sold insurance, owned a dog, wore his shirts tucked in too tight. He liked me, more than I expected. Said I made him laugh. Said he felt at peace when we talked. And I said yes when he asked me to dinner. Not because I wanted to, because I was tired. Tired of the whispers. Tired of my mother's silence. Tired of playing the same role every day and still feeling like a fraud. I thought, maybe if I just try hard enough I can make it work. Maybe if I marry a man I'll finally fit. Finally be enough for them. Finally stop feeling like a mistake. Alice never said anything. When I told her David had asked me out, she just nodded. He seems fine. She smiled politely, but her eyes didn't move with her mouth. She went quiet for days after that. No humming, no teasing, just silence that weighed heavier than any fight could have. David and I dated for 6 months. He was everything a mother would want. Steady, patient, church-going. He liked classic rock and jigsaw puzzles. He took me to Italian restaurants and asked about my job and kissed my cheek like it was something sacred. And still, every time he held my hand, I felt like I was stealing from someone else. Alice didn't ask questions. She cooked dinner. She did the laundry. She left early on the nights David came over saying she had errands or just needed air. But once, I found her asleep on the couch with an old photo of us in her lap. I said nothing. The night David proposed, we were sitting in the park. It was spring. The air smelled like lilacs and fresh grass. He pulled out a small gold ring, nothing flashy, and said, "You don't have to be perfect. Just be mine." And I almost said yes. I almost said yes because I was tired of running, because I wanted a family again, because the idea of a wedding, cake, music, people clapping, felt like a kind of redemption I hadn't allowed myself to dream of. But when I got home that night, Alice was in the kitchen. She hadn't turned on the lights. She was sitting in the dark, barefoot, drinking wine straight from the bottle. She didn't look at me when she spoke. "Are you going to marry him?" I opened my mouth, and then I sat down across from her and cried. I don't mean tears. I mean the kind of crying that empties you. Shoulders shaking, mouth open, a sound no one wants to make. She didn't comfort me. Not at first. She let me cry. Let it all come out. Then quietly she said, "I'll let you go if that's what you want. I won't fight. I just need to know, is this your choice or theirs?" And that was it. The question that burned everything else down. Because I knew the answer. I'd always known. The next morning I gave the ring back. David didn't say much. He looked more relieved than hurt. Maybe he'd known too. Maybe I was the only one still trying to fool herself. When I came home, Alice was planting tulips. She didn't ask what happened. She just wiped her hands on her jeans, stood up, and pulled me into her arms. I buried my face in her shoulder and said, "I'm sorry." And she whispered, "I know." We never spoke about David again. His name dissolved like sugar and water. There, and then gone. But something changed after that. I stopped trying to be someone else. Not publicly, not loudly, but in small ways that mattered. I stopped going to church. I stopped answering my mother's guilt-riddled letters. I bought myself a necklace shaped like a little heart and let Alice clasp it around my neck. And she began to believe, maybe for the first time, that I had truly chosen her. Not out of fear, not out of loneliness, but because I couldn't live a lie anymore. Almost marrying a man showed me what I'd nearly lost, the one person who knew every inch of my soul and loved me anyway. Alice wasn't perfect, but she was mine. And I had almost walked away from that, for a ring, a photo in the paper, a life I could have survived but never truly lived. I didn't walk away again, not after that. His name was David. He was kind, quiet, a decent man. We met at church, back when I still went to please my mother. He sold insurance, owned a dog, wore his shirts tucked in too tight. He liked me, more than I expected, said I made him laugh, said he felt at peace when we talked. And I said yes when he asked me to dinner. Not because I wanted to, because I was tired. Tired of the whispers, tired of my mother's silence, tired of playing the same role every day and still feeling like a fraud. I thought, maybe if I just try hard enough I can make it work. Maybe if I marry a man I'll finally fit, finally be enough for them, finally stop feeling like a mistake. Alice never said anything. When I told her David had asked me out, she just nodded. He seems fine. She smiled politely, but her eyes didn't move with her mouth. She went quiet for days after that. No humming, no teasing, just silence that weighed heavier than any fight could have. David and I dated for 6 months. He was everything a mother would want, steady, patient, church-going. He liked classic rock and jigsaw puzzles. He took me to Italian restaurants and asked about my job and kissed my cheek like it was something sacred. And still, every time he held my hand, I felt like I was stealing from someone else. Alice didn't ask questions. She cooked dinner. She did the laundry. She left early on the nights David came over, saying she had errands or just needed air. But once, I found her asleep on the couch with an old photo of us in her lap. I said nothing. The night David proposed, we were sitting in the park. It was spring. The air smelled like lilacs and fresh grass. He pulled out a small gold ring, nothing flashy, and said, "You don't have to be perfect. Just be mine." And I almost said yes. I almost said yes, because I was tired of running, because I wanted a family again, because the idea of a wedding, cake, music, people clapping, felt like a kind of redemption I hadn't allowed myself to dream of. But when I got home that night, Alice was in the kitchen. She hadn't turned on the lights. She was sitting in the dark, barefoot, drinking wine straight from the bottle. She didn't look at me when she spoke. "Are you going to marry him?" I opened my mouth, and then I sat down across from her and cried. I don't mean tears. I mean the kind of crying that empties you. Shoulders shaking, mouth open, a sound no one wants to make. She didn't comfort me, not at first. She let me cry, let it all come out. Then quietly she said, "I'll let you go if that's what you want. I won't fight. I just need to know, is this your choice or theirs?" And that was it. The question that burned everything else down, because I knew the answer. I'd always known. The next morning, I gave the ring back. David didn't say much. He looked more relieved than hurt. Maybe he'd known too. Maybe I was the only one still trying to fool herself. When I came home, Alice was planting tulips. She didn't ask what happened. She just wiped her hands on her jeans, stood up, and pulled me into her arms. I buried my face in her shoulder and said, "I'm sorry." And she whispered, "I know." We never spoke about David again. His name dissolved like sugar and water. there and then gone. But something changed after that. I stopped trying to be someone else. Not publicly, not loudly, but in small ways that mattered. I stopped going to church. I stopped answering my mother's guilt-riddled letters. I bought myself a necklace shaped like a little heart and let Alice clasp it around my neck. And she began to believe, maybe for the first time, that I had truly chosen her, not out of fear, not out of loneliness, but because I couldn't live a lie anymore. Almost marrying a man showed me what I'd nearly lost, the one person who knew every inch of my soul and loved me anyway. Alice wasn't perfect, but she was mine. And I had almost walked away from that. For a ring, a photo in the paper, a life I could have survived but never truly lived. I didn't walk away again, not after that. It was a Tuesday evening in early November. The air had already turned bitter, and the windows fogged up quickly from the soup simmering on the stove. She was humming again, something soft, probably from her Motown phase, as she chopped parsley with her usual chaos. She never did learn how to keep the kitchen clean. I had just come in from feeding the birds and was shaking off my coat when I heard it. A dull thud, followed by silence. "Alice," I called, expecting some kind of joke, maybe a groan about dropping a spoon again. No answer. I stepped into the kitchen and found her on the floor, just lying there, her hands still curled, eyes wide but unfocused, the parsley scattered like confetti around her head. I dropped everything. My knees hit the tile before I even realized I was screaming her name. I touched her face, and it was still warm, but slack in a way I'd never felt before. Her lips parted, as if trying to say something, but nothing came out. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial the phone. 911, what's your emergency? She fell, she's not talking. I think it's a stroke. Please hurry. The minutes between that call and the sound of sirens stretched into some other universe. I talked to her the entire time. I stroked her hair and whispered, "Stay with me. I'm right here, my love. I'm right here." And even then, with my world crashing, I didn't say it loud enough for the paramedics to hear. When they burst in, uniforms and questions, I stood back, useless. She was whisked away on a stretcher, and I wasn't allowed to ride in the ambulance. Family only, they said. I followed in my car, driving through tears so thick I couldn't see the lines on the road. I kept thinking, this can't be it. Not like this. Not without goodbye. Not without someone knowing who she really is to me. At the hospital, they had me wait. Not in a private room, not in a quiet space. Just a row of plastic chairs under buzzing fluorescent lights. A nurse came by with a clipboard. "Are you a relative?" "I'm her partner," I said before I could stop myself. She blinked. "I mean, we live together. I'm her closest person." But it wasn't enough. Not legally, not officially, not in any way that mattered to the system. They asked if she had a medical directive. I said yes. I had it at home, signed years ago, tucked away in our fireproof box. But they needed it now. A copy, proof, permission. "She has a brother," I said reluctantly. "I can give you his number." That was my second mistake. They called him. We hadn't spoken to him in over 30 years. He never once visited, never sent a card. But now, suddenly, he had authority. When he arrived, he barely looked at me. He walked past, shoulders stiff, like I was a chair in the hallway. "She's still doing that roommate thing," he muttered to the nurse. I wanted to hit him. I didn't. Instead, I sat in that chair all night, cold, forgotten. Every time a nurse passed by, I asked for news. They kept their voices polite and vague. "She's stable. She's being evaluated. The family will be updated soon. Not you, not partner, just the family." At dawn, they finally let me see her. For 10 minutes. She was pale, tubes in her arms, one side of her mouth drooping slightly. Her eyes fluttered when I touched her hand. but she didn't speak. I sat beside her and said all the things I'd rehearsed in my head during the night. I'm here. I never left. I'm so sorry. I should have fought harder for us. I should have shouted your name from rooftops. Please stay, just a little longer. I kissed her forehead, for the first time in public. No one stopped me. No one saw, or maybe they just didn't care anymore. When my 10 minutes were up, they gently asked me to leave. Her brother took control of the decisions after that. Refused to talk to me. Didn't even let me know when the doctors moved her to the private care wing. He told the staff I wasn't to be updated without his approval. So I sat in the hospital cafe every day, bought coffee I didn't drink, read newspapers I didn't see, waited for glimpses, hoped for miracles. She never woke up fully. Her body stayed alive, but the spark that was Alice flickered further and further away. And still, they kept me on the outside. 42 years of loving someone. And in the end, I was just a stranger in the hallway. The call came at 6:12 a.m. I hadn't been sleeping, just lying on the couch, fully dressed, phone in hand, willing it to ring. The sun hadn't risen yet. The house felt like a church long after the sermon, hollow, quiet, sacred in the wrong way. Miss Green, the voice said, my last name, not hers, not ours. Yes, I answered. I'm calling from St. Joseph's. There's been a decision regarding Alice Hammond's care. Her condition has declined. The family has opted for comfort measures only. The family. I wanted to laugh. The bitter, broken kind of laugh. What family? The man who hadn't spoken to her in 3 decades. The same one who called her lifestyle a shame and said I was just a phase. He signed off, I asked. Yes, Mr. Hammond gave written consent. A stranger, a man who knew nothing about the way she slept curled like a comma, who never saw her cry when old songs played, who didn't know she hated bananas, or that her ankles ached in the cold. He was now the voice for her life. I wanted to scream, to tear something from the walls. Instead, I whispered, can I see her? A pause. I'll check. They let me in that afternoon. She was thinner. Her skin had taken on that gray tone I'd seen once before, when her father died. I sat by the bed, holding her hand, my thumb brushing over the veins like I was trying to wake them up. The machines beeped in their slow, steady rhythm. It felt obscene, so mechanical, so impersonal. Hey, it's me, I said, as if I could fool her into thinking it was just another Tuesday, and we'd go home soon. I read to her that day, the book we'd passed back and forth for 20 years, collected poems of Edna St. Vincent Millay. She always read the last line of every poem twice. She said some things deserved an echo. I read every word aloud. Her brother never came to visit. He just signed the forms. Papers to withdraw support. Papers to allow her body to begin the quiet unraveling toward death. I wasn't consulted, not once. After 4 days, a nurse pulled me aside. They'll likely move her to hospice within the week. We'll need a signature to transfer custody of care. I'll sign, I said instinctively. She shook her head. It has to be next of kin. That phrase landed like a stone in my chest. Next of kin. Not next of heart. Not next of love. Just next on some list written by people who never once looked inside our home, our lives, our truth. He signed again. 2 days later, they moved her to a small hospice center an hour away. They didn't tell me which room. I had to call 3 times, pretending to be a cousin, just to get the location. When I arrived, they let me in, more out of exhaustion, I think, than kindness. The nurses were different here, quieter, older. They could see it in my face. She's waiting for someone, one of them said softly. You. She hasn't said a word, but she opens her eyes more when you come. So I stayed. I brushed her hair, played her favorite music, tucked the blanket around her shoulders the way she used to like. I whispered memories into her ear like prayers. And finally, on the 6th night, When the sky outside had turned lavender with dusk, she opened her eyes, just barely, and looked at me. Her mouth didn't move, but her fingers did. A soft squeeze. 1, then 2. I leaned closer, tears already falling. "I love you," I whispered. "I'm here. I never left." She blinked, just once. That was her answer. And then she stopped. No struggle, no gasp, just stillness. A slow, final quiet. She slipped away holding my hand. Not her brother's, not a nurse's. Mine. The nurses gave me a moment. I kissed her forehead, ran my fingers over her brow. "You were never invisible," I told her. "Not to me." Then I walked out of the room, into a world that would write her off as a single woman with no children, no legacy, no headline. A stranger signed her death papers, but I signed her soul, with every year, every morning kiss, every spoon of soup, and whispered joke, and quiet night in our bed. He may have had the paperwork, but I was her life. They gave me 15 minutes. 15 minutes to say goodbye to the woman I spent my entire adult life loving. Hospice rules, protocol, sanitation, space, schedules. The nurse was kind about it, her voice soft, eyes lowered. But the truth was brutal beneath the courtesy. "You are not her wife. You have no legal right to grieve beyond the time we allow." I stepped into the room quietly, like I didn't want to disturb her, even though she was already gone. The air was still, almost sacred, and yet it felt like a betrayal just being there under those terms. 15 minutes, after 42 years, a lifetime reduced to a slot on a clipboard. She looked peaceful. That phrase always sounded like a lie to me, but not this time. Her expression was soft. Her mouth was closed gently, and the furrow between her brows, the one she always got when she was overthinking something, was gone. I pulled a chair to the side of the bed and sat down. Her hand was still warm. I held it in both of mine, like I was trying to memorize the shape of her one last time. The same hand that had cupped my face in the kitchen during storms, that had traced letters on my back while I fell asleep, that had passed me buttered toast across 100 quiet mornings. I couldn't stop my tears. They came steady, silent. I didn't sob. I didn't speak. I just sat there and wept the way you do when there are no words left, only the raw ache of a soul being torn open in slow motion. I wanted to apologize for not being louder, for not being braver, for not fighting harder when it mattered. But something inside me, maybe her voice, said, "You were enough. You were everything." I thought about all the times we'd been careful, all the rooms we left space between us, all the parties we danced on opposite sides of the room. I thought about the years of hiding, and yet somehow the love never dimmed. It stayed intact. It stayed ours. We made a world out of glances and gestures, and somehow that world had been enough, until now. I traced her knuckles with my thumb. "You were the love of my life," I said aloud, for the first time in public. And I don't care who hears it. There was no one in the room to hear, but I said it anyway. For her, for me, for all the invisible lives lived just like ours. Quietly, deeply, out of reach of recognition. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the small, cloth-bound notebook we used to keep, the one we hid behind the cookbooks, filled with decades of notes to each other. I had written one more page the night she passed. I read it to her now. "You were the morning light in every year I lived. You were the quiet strength in every storm. If love means home, you were the roof, the walls, the door that stayed unlocked. I will miss you until I stop breathing. And even then, I hope we'll find each other again, somewhere freer." I closed the notebook and placed it gently on her chest. 15 minutes was almost gone. I leaned down and kissed her forehead. Her skin smelled like lavender and old flannel, and something I can only describe as ours. I wanted to wrap her up and take her home, away from this sanitized place that knew nothing of her. As I stood to leave, I looked back one last time, and for a moment I swear I could see the room as it should have been. Photos on the walls, friends gathered, music playing, someone laughing, someone saying they were together for over 40 years, and someone else nodding and replying, "That's real love." But that's not the world we were given. Ours was quieter, but no less real. I walked out of the room and into a hallway full of strangers. The nurse at the desk nodded toward the clock, a polite reminder that my time was up. And I thought, it may be up here, but it's not over, because she's in every corner of my house, every folded sweater, every bent recipe card, every scar on my heart. I held her hand one last time, and in that moment, I didn't feel like her secret. I felt like her home. There was no obituary, no photo in the paper, no carefully crafted paragraph listing her accomplishments or loved ones. Just a name on a death certificate, printed in block letters by a man who didn't know her middle name, Alice Lorraine Hammond. Gone. She didn't want a funeral, not in the traditional sense. She'd always said it was a theater for the living to feel less guilty. But still, I'd imagined something. A moment. A room with flowers, someone reading her favorite poem, a soft hymn maybe, something to say. She was here. Instead, it was a Tuesday morning at the cemetery, quiet and cold. The clouds hung low like they were trying to press the sky down to earth. The kind of morning where breath fogs the air in short, shallow bursts. I stood alone, gloved hands wrapped around a single white rose. The undertaker gave me a polite nod. He didn't ask who I was. Maybe he assumed I was a distant cousin, or a neighbor, or maybe he just didn't care. Her brother didn't come. He had made all the decisions, hospice, death certificate, burial, and then vanished. No calls, no statements, no interest in where or how she'd be laid to rest. So I chose the plot myself. Row F, facing the pond. It was the only thing I could still give her. A place with light, a view she would have liked, somewhere quiet enough that the wind might carry my voice to her on the days I came to talk. The casket was simple, light wood. She hated excess. No velvet interior, no gold trim, just plain honest pine, the way she lived. When they lowered her into the ground, I felt my knees threaten to give. Not from grief. That had settled into me long ago, like a second spine, but from the weight of being the only one who knew who she really was. Nobody else came. Not friends, not family, not co-workers from her younger years. No one. I was the only soul in the world who saw her from beginning to end. It should have been a disgrace, but instead it felt sacred. I stood at the edge of that grave, the wind cutting across my cheeks, and I whispered everything I'd ever been too afraid to say in public. You were my partner, my love, my family, my home. I said it loud, louder than the crows in the trees, louder than the ache in my throat. I loved you with every part of me, and I always will. The groundskeeper coughed behind me, gently. A signal. Time to go. But I wasn't done. From my coat pocket, I pulled out a photograph. It was old, grainy, sun-damaged. Us at the beach, 1985. She had her arm around my waist. We weren't even looking at the camera. We were laughing at something. Probably the seagull that had stolen her sandwich. I knelt and tucked it into the dirt, just beneath the edge of the headstone. It didn't bear her full name yet. Just a temporary metal plaque waiting for a real one. No quote, no mention of a partner, no history. Just a birth year and a dash and a death year. That dash held everything. 42 years of mornings and tea and whispered jokes. 42 years of brushing against each other in public like we were strangers. Of birthday cards signed from your friend, of separate tax returns, and 2 beds when we traveled. I wanted more for her, but I gave her all I could. Before I left, I bent down and pressed my palm against the fresh soil. I'll come back, I promised. Not with flowers, with stories. Because if no one else would remember her, I would. If no one else would speak her name with reverence, I would. If no one else would say she was deeply, beautifully loved, then I'd say it every day, until the wind learned the shape of it. As I walked back to my car, I didn't cry. I had cried enough. What I felt now was something quieter, something heavier than grief, but more honest. I had buried the love of my life, and I had done it alone, but I had also buried her as she truly was, not as a secret, not as a footnote, but as mine. It was weeks after the burial before I could touch her things. Her sweater still hung on the back of the kitchen chair. Her toothbrush stood in the cup, quietly waiting. The house had the scent of her, lavender and chamomile, and the faintest trace of cinnamon from her favorite tea. I kept the windows closed so it wouldn't drift away. I wasn't ready. Not to clean, not to pack, not to face the silence she'd left behind. But grief does strange things with time. Some days it drags you into the floor. Others, it moves your hands before your mind can object. That morning I opened the closet in the guest room, the one we never used, the one we called the junk room, even though it was mostly filled with old winter coats and dusty suitcases we hadn't touched in years. That's when I saw it. A small wooden box tucked behind the old vacuum cleaner. It wasn't locked, just sealed shut with a single strip of faded blue ribbon. I sat cross-legged on the floor and opened it, my heart thudding with something that felt like both dread and reverence. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to me, some dated as far back as 1976. Each envelope was numbered, each one written in her careful, slanted handwriting. Some pages were thin and yellowed, others newer, written on napkins, on postcards, on the back of receipts. I picked one at random, not 14, and unfolded it slowly. You were asleep when I wrote this, curled up like a comma, your hand still warm from holding mine. I wanted to tell you something, but didn't want to wake you. Today, I watched you feed the birds. You didn't know I was watching, but the way you moved, the tenderness, it reminded me why I never walked away. I'd rather have a lifetime of hiding with you than 1,000 years of safety with anyone else. My breath caught in my throat. I read another. I dreamed once that we could live in the open. You wore a red dress. I kissed your shoulder in front of everyone and no one looked away. It was the simplest thing. And I woke up crying because I knew I'd never see it in this life. And another. Sometimes I think about what happens if I go first. If I do, know this. I loved you louder than I was allowed to. I loved you in every step I took beside you. Every lie I told to protect you. Every dinner I made without saying why. I loved you in silence, but it was never small, never timid, just quiet, the way mountain roots hold the weight of snow. I cried, not the heavy choking sobs of the hospital, but the deep soul-splitting kind. The kind that leaks out in small gasps. The kind that empties you without asking permission. She had written these letters for decades, never given them to me, never mentioned them, just kept them, hidden in a box, as proof that she had spoken her truth somewhere, even if the world never heard it. Letter number 28 was dated just 3 months before she collapsed. I've been thinking of writing a book, not to publish, just to leave behind. A story of us. Not by name, I'd never expose you like that. But something to make someone out there feel less alone. Think anyone would care to read about 2 women who made soup and fell asleep with books on their chests? Yes, I thought, they would care. They'd care so much. Because we weren't nobody. We were 2 lives, fully lived, just not loudly. I spent the entire afternoon reading, every letter, every page, each one a little window into the moments we didn't always speak aloud. Her fears, her memories, her hopes for a world we never got to live in. And when I finished, I held them all in my lap and whispered, I heard you. All those words she never said, I heard them now. And suddenly, I wasn't alone anymore. She had written herself into the spaces I feared would go silent forever. I gently tied the ribbon back around the box, placed it beside my pillow, and let it rest where she used to sleep. That night, I dreamed of her for the first time since the hospital. She wasn't young in the dream. She wasn't glowing or dressed in white. She looked exactly like she had the week before she died. Lines around her eyes, silver in her hair, soft sweater hanging loose. She looked at me and said, "Now you tell our story." And then she smiled. The real one. The one I fell in love with. The morning after I found her letters, I woke up with an ache I couldn't name. Not grief. That had already rooted itself inside me, living in my joints like weather. No, this was something else. A pull. A voice that whispered, "Write it down. All of it." I made tea. Her favorite blend. The box was almost empty. I hadn't had the heart to use it before. I sat at the kitchen table where we had eaten hundreds of quiet meals and opened a fresh notebook. The page stared back at me, blank, intimidating, patient. I wrote the first sentence out loud, to the air, like a vow. She was never my roommate. My hand shook as I pressed the pen to paper. 42 years of love, hidden under politeness and small lies, began to unravel, memory by memory, room by room. I wrote until my fingers cramped, until the light shifted across the walls, until I could no longer tell if the ache in my chest was sadness or release. I didn't try to make it beautiful. I wasn't thinking about anyone reading it. I just wrote like I was finally breathing. I wrote about how we met, the coffee cups, the broken printer, her laugh that cracked through every wall I'd built. I wrote about our first touch, the time she brushed dirt from my cheek in the garden and left my skin burning for days. I wrote about our silences, our code words, the dinners where we couldn't toast to anniversaries because there was no date we were allowed to mark. I wrote about our small victories, the first time we slept side by side without fear, the quiet "I love you" she whispered when I was half asleep, the night we sat on the roof and imagined a world that wanted us. And I wrote about the shame, about the birthdays spent apart because family didn't want her there, about the wedding invitations addressed only to me, about the Christmas we ate soup in silence because my mother sent back the gifts we mailed her. I wrote through it all. Some days I cried, some days I laughed. Once I threw the pen across the room because I couldn't find the words for the way her absence feels at midnight. But I always came back. Every morning I opened the notebook again and picked up where I left off. I filled page after page, not chronologically, but honestly. One memory would bleed into another. One scent would unlock a moment I'd forgotten. Her perfume on a train ride to Vermont. The way she tucked my scarf into my coat like I'd break if I got cold. I didn't edit myself. I didn't ask permission. For the first time in my life, I was telling the truth without apology. When the notebook was full, I bought another, and then another. Soon I had a small stack, pages covered in my handwriting, messy, uneven, ink smudged by tears and tea stains. A whole life, finally visible. I wasn't sure what to do with it. The idea of publishing it felt foreign, almost arrogant. But I remembered one of her letters, letter number 28. The one where she dreamed of writing our story to make someone feel less alone. So I made copies, just a few. I gave one to the local library, tucked into a plain manila envelope marked Anonymous Memoir. I left one at the community center, on the shelf labeled Donations. I mailed one to a small LGBTQ+ archive in another state, afraid to include a return address. I didn't want recognition. I just wanted her to be known, because she deserved more than a metal plaque and a file number. She deserved to be remembered, fully, truly, loudly. A few weeks later, I got a letter, handwritten, no return name, just a stamp and 4 short lines. I found your story in a forgotten corner of the library. It made me cry. It made me breathe. I thought I was alone. Thank you. I pressed that letter to my chest and whispered, she would have smiled at this. And in that moment I felt her, not as a ghost, not as a memory, as presence. Because writing her was like keeping her alive. One word, one page, one truth at a time. She knocked on my door on a Thursday afternoon. I was folding laundry, one of those quiet domestic tasks that feel heavier without someone to talk to while doing it. The knock was soft, almost uncertain. I expected a neighbor, maybe a delivery. Instead, when I opened the door, I saw a girl, no older than 20, maybe 22, standing on my porch with a copy of my story clutched to her chest. Her eyes were already red. "Are you—" She hesitated. "Did you write this?" My mouth went dry. She held out the little booklet, the version I'd left at the community center. It was worn already, folded at the corners, read and reread. She looked like she hadn't slept much. There was a tremble in her fingers, but her gaze was steady. "I'm sorry," she added quickly. "I don't mean to intrude. I've just been looking for you." I opened the door wider and nodded toward the kitchen. "Come in." She followed me inside without saying another word. I poured tea, out of habit, even though I knew neither of us would really drink it. She sat at the table, her hand still holding the story, like it was something alive. For a while, we just sat in silence. Then she spoke, softly, like a confession. "My name is Elena. I found this last week. Someone left it at the LGBTQ youth group where I volunteer. I started reading it on the bus home, and didn't stop until it was done. And then I just cried. For hours." Her voice cracked. She looked down. "I've never read anything like it. Not from someone older. Not from someone who lived it. Not fiction. Just truth." I nodded. My throat burned. She continued. "My grandmother kicked me out when I told her. My mom says I should just be normal for a while. I feel like I'm living half a life. But then I read you, and I thought, maybe I can still have love." Tears welled in her eyes again, and this time she let them fall. "I didn't know it was possible," she whispered, "that someone could love someone for 40 years, even in silence, that it could still mean something." I reached across the table and took her hand. "It means everything," I said, and suddenly the years between us disappeared. The generations, the politics, the fear. We were two people, sitting across from one another, tied together by a truth the world still didn't know how to hold properly. That love, when real, never needs permission. Elena stayed for hours. She asked about Alice, about our house, our routines, the little details that hadn't made it into the story. I told her about Alice's terrible sense of direction, the way she used to sing to the dog food commercials, how she would always check that the door was locked twice, then ask me if I had done it just to be sure. I showed Elena the box of letters. She held one in her hands like it was glass. "I want this kind of love," she said. "You will," I told her. "But promise me something." She looked up. "Don't wait until you're old to be brave." She nodded, slowly, then fiercely. Before she left, she stood at the door and looked at me like I was something sacred. "You didn't just save me," she said. "You gave me a future." I watched her walk down the sidewalk, the story still clutched to her chest. And for the first time in a long while, the ache in my ribs softened. I had spent so many years afraid no one would ever know what we were, that we'd vanish quietly like smoke, and the world would go on, none the wiser. But now, one person knew. And sometimes, that's all it takes. Just one person to carry the story forward. I returned to her grave on a Sunday in late spring. The air was warm, soft with the smell of cut grass and lilacs. Bees drifted lazily through the cemetery rows. The kind of day she would have called a good sky day. Blue but not boastful, just gently open. It had been almost a year. I hadn't gone back since the burial. I couldn't. I told myself it was too painful. that she wasn't really there anyway. But the truth was, I was afraid it would look the same. Just a lonely patch of ground, unnoticed, unloved. But it didn't. As I walked down the gravel path toward row F, something caught my breath. There were flowers, not one or two, but a dozen small bundles, wildflowers, daffodils, roses, some fresh, some fading, tied with twine, set carefully against the headstone that now bore her full name in clean, gentle letters. Alice Lorraine Hammond, 1952, 2021. You were deeply loved. I froze. My hand flew to my mouth. Someone had carved that line. Someone had seen those words, mine, and placed them in stone. I knelt down, fingers trembling, and found a small folded note tucked among the flowers. It was handwritten in a neat looping style I didn't recognize. I never met her, but I read your story. I know what you shared was real. I come here sometimes to sit beside her because I believe love like that doesn't die. Thank you for letting us see it. Below the message was a simple signature. E. Elena. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. She had come. She had remembered. I sat beside the grave for a long time, knees in the grass, watching shadows shift through the trees above. I told Alice everything. About the letters, the visit, the stories I'd heard from people who'd found our little memoir floating around in libraries, shelters, even a bookstore shelf in a city I'd never visited. Somewhere along the way we had become a whisper, soft but persistent. A quiet truth passed hand to hand, and in that moment I no longer felt like we had lived in vain. We hadn't shouted our love. We hadn't posted photos or thrown weddings or signed papers. But we had loved with endurance, with grace, with devotion. We had held each other through decades of silence. And now somehow the world had begun to listen. Before I left, I placed a new photo beside her stone, one I'd printed the week before. It was us on our porch, wrapped in the same blanket, mugs in hand. She was laughing, and I was looking at her, not the camera. That was always how it was. My eyes on her, always. As I stood up to go, I felt the wind move through the grass. Not strong, just enough to lift the corner of the note Elena had left. Like the world, too, was reaching out. I turned back once more and said, "You weren't forgotten, my love. You never will be. Because now she lives in every person who reads our story and sees themselves. In every hand that trembles before reaching for another. In every whispered confession made under safe covers. In every life lived a little freer because two women once dared to love in silence. And then, finally, to speak." I walked home that day lighter than I had been in years. Not because the grief had gone, it never does, but because I was no longer the only one carrying the truth of her. It was in the world now, and that's all she ever wanted. Love does not need permission to be real. It doesn't need to be loud to be lasting. It doesn't need applause to be true. Sometimes love lives in silence, and still, it changes everything. If this story touched you, share a piece of your own in the comments. Tell us about someone you loved or someone who saw you for who you are, because stories like ours are not rare, just rarely told, and now they deserve to be heard.